Good evening. I take great pleasure to welcome tonight's speaker, Anna Puigjaner. Anna's an architect, editor, researcher, curator, mostly traveler. When she lights, she is also co-founder of a studio in Barcelona called MAIO. Anna spent a lot of time imagining a future in which housing is more specifically suited to the different needs of its inhabitants, and especially the idea that sometimes that means not having a kitchen. Her project that she entitled Kitchenless received the Wheelwright Prize in 2016 with an endowment of $100,000 for research where, and that's the reason she's never at home, researching internationally existing models of communal habitation. Let me say a little bit about the Wheelwright Prize. It originated at Harvard in the GSD Department of Architecture as the Arthur C. Wheelwright Traveling Fellowship. Now, the title is important. It was basically, this is 1935, it was basically conceptualized as on the model of the Beaux-Arts Grand Tour, of the European Grand Tour, where no matter what your education, no matter where your education, you couldn't be a properly educated architect until you had gone to Rome, Greece, and seen all the ancient monuments. And the prize, of course, was 1935, was a time when Americans, very few Americans traveled internationally, and it was explicitly in order to make that travel possible. I'll just mention a few of the early fellows: Paul Rudolph, Elliot Noyes, William Worcester, I.M. Pei. There are many of that caliber. In 2013, Mohsen Mostafavi opened the prize to early career architects worldwide. Previously, it had been only Harvard alums. Now the rule is the sole eligibility requirement is that applicants must have received a professionally accredited architecture degree in the previous 15 years. I'm just saying, many eligible people in the room. As I said, though, when Anna won the prize, it set her off on a travel schedule that I will let her tell and talk about tonight. When she does every now and then light like a flying bird. Her work has been published, and MAIO's work has been published in magazines like Domus, Plot, Frame, Detail. The work was exhibited in the Venice Biennale, in the Chicago Architectural Biennial. It's been exhibited at Storefront and other locations. She's taught many places. The firm is MAIO is in Barcelona, in the Gracia, it's called that, yeah. District. It's well, I don't know if you have time to show it. It's a very interesting district. It started in the time right when she won the prize. They had taken on workers from other businesses to kind of make a collective, partly, if I understand, for economic reasons, partly for theoretical reasons, let's say. By 2016, when they could actually afford to now have a studio alone, they actually decided that they were no longer compelled to have a studio alone. So already this idea of cooperation is a kind of kitchenless office in its own way. Welcome, Anna Puigjaner.
Thank you very much, Michael, for such a nice introduction. And thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. As you may imagine, tonight is quite a special moment for me because I'm closing 2 years of traveling that have been quite intense. So 2 years ago, when I received the call about the Wheelwright Prize, Mustafavi mentioned that it was going to be a life-changing thing, and he could not be righter. These last 2 years have been probably the most intense ones in my life, having a strong impact in both the professional and the personal level. So I cannot be more thankful to the jury that at that moment, 2 years ago, considered my proposal of value and that have offered me this opportunity. So thank you, Mustafavi, Michael Heiss, Eva Frank, Ginny Kim, Kil Mo, Rafael Moneo, and Benjamin Brodsky. And of course, thanks to Harvard GSD and the Arthur Wheelwright Traveling Fellowship itself. Tonight, as you will see, we will see a lot of kitchens and a lot of food. So my apologies if you haven't had dinner. Is that what mainly I've been doing for the last 2 years? But before going to the cooking wall, let me introduce the origins and aim of this research. When Ren Koolhaas published his famous book, The Littlest New York, in 1978, 40 years ago, he pictured a city, New York, defined by a set of big buildings on a grid. The famous grid created in 1811, thanks to the commissioner plans, that was actually showed inside the flap of the book. In Koolhaas' imaginary, buildings enclose as envelopes a whole wall in themselves. And the grid was just the base that allowed each of those extraordinary walls to happen. In fact, several projects developed by Koolhaas and his colleagues at OMA appear in the book. Among others, this one, the City of the Capital Glove project, that shows again the relentless uniform grid that supports a set of buildings, representing a virtual catalog of OMA self-proclaimed influences. As for instance, we can see here, there's Le Corbusier, Lisinski over here. So they saw New York as an incubator that holds an extraordinary set of reference, extraordinary pieces as a collection. A type of wall, a type of reality, where the building, specifically the skyscraper, defines the protagonist, to the point that is treated, as Madeleine Misseldrop drawings shown, as characters, as persons themselves, as people themselves, sorry. So as everyone, I got fascinated by this extraordinary collection of skyscrapers, and especially it captured my attention, the Waldorf Astoria, especially because the Waldorf Astoria holds a set of apartments that lack of kitchens. So around 10 years ago, I started researching about them. I was fascinated, as Koolhaas was, with all the stories. You see the kitchenless floor plan? With all the stories embedded in that building. The people that live in, its type of organization, its structure. It was kind of a gossiping thing, also a bit vicious. To my surprise, when I tried to understand the origin of this kitchenless typology, I discovered that New York was filled at that time by similar apartments. That the Waldorf Astoria was extraordinary because it was extremely luxurious, but that actually the typology, the life without kitchens, and to have hotel services instead, it was quite ordinary, quite common. There was a time in New York when the house was understood as an open system. It was designed not as a single entity, but as a set of connected fragments that could change depending on the need, so it was systemic. The space was flexible and adaptable on demand, and expanded also by means of collective rooms and domestic services. The kitchen was optional as well as the rest of the rooms, and sometimes it was left apart, kitchenless. The story of this New York kitchenless typology dates back to the economic depression that followed the American Civil War in 1865. At that moment, new architectural solutions for the middle class appear that not only reduce significantly the cost of living, but also allow the elimination of housekeeping annoyances. There were all kinds of apartments and all kinds of sizes as well, all of them promoted by the private sector. And we could find small cases as this one, with 2 rooms and a bathroom. to extremely large ones, with 2 apartments per floor plan and no kitchen. Due to the commercial aim, it was highly appreciated that such buildings could offer not only a wide spectrum of shared spaces and shared services, but also flexible size apartments. Not only to offer good services for the inhabitants, but also to satisfy a bigger demand and accommodate a wider social range. In New York, kitchenless housing, So despite being promoted by the private sector, also these collective houses had a kind of quite a social role. Most of the rooms were open to the public, becoming true social condensers. So thanks to the externalization of the kitchen and other domestic spaces, the typology blurred the traditional limits between the public and the private sphere, between the domestic and the urban, and thanks to its flexibility and sharingly, was able to shrink radically housekeeping cost, waste, and labor. So if Kulha saw New York as a city defined by big skyscrapers, for me New York was a city and is a city defined by a fragmented, flexible, and interconnected reality, where the kitchen played an important role to allow this flexibility to happen. And this way of looking at things is also a condition of our time, a way of seeing our close reality from a contemporary perspective. If this image was captured our attention years ago by the fact that the domestic scene and interior was placed in a provocative manner in the middle of the landscape, raising questions regarding the limits between inside and outside, questions regarding about what domesticity meant at that time. Nowadays, this exact image struck us not only by that, but also by the fact, by other things. So if decades ago, a family would still gather around the TV, nowadays, not only the image and the idea of the family has radically changed, but also a new social reality is engaging with the atomization of devices and increasing demand on services. The TV has lost definitely its central space in the house, and therefore it has modified behaviors and the way we use our homes and our cities at large. Now, we not only watch TV in the living room, we watch TV in the bedroom and even in the city itself, in the subway. Uses are superimposed, overlapping, and the way in which we use the space become increasingly more fragmented, as it happened in the 19th century in New York, more fragile and also more ephemeral, but at the same time, more interconnected. So when 2 years ago, I proposed this project for the Wheelwright Prize, my initial intention, it was actually what I said, was to turn visible the contemporary cases of collective kitchens, and through that to expose that shared kitchens have diverse political and economical circumstances. However, my interest in collective kitchens go beyond that. As it happened in 19th century in New York, I consider that the kitchen can be once again an architectural tool to transgress and redefine pre-established social and spatial conditions, specifically domestic conditions, of course, in relation to gender, labor, housekeeping, and waste. And that in order to answer to our contemporary network, ephemeral and mobile reality. In order to unveil this, during these last 2 years, I have done 5 travels, visiting 8 countries, researching with a group of international marvelous people that they might be watching now, that have traveled with me, allowing me to understand better their culture, and be super, super nice with me. So I really have to thank to Laura Campeny, Adama Diata, Kamsai, Ochanok Nawa Prep, Yuki Masamoto, Gise Morales, Nuria Ortigosa, and Mikako Oshima. And of course, my partners at MAIO that have allowed to do this. So thanks to Guillermo Lopez, Maria Cerneco, and Alfredo Lerida. So alongside with these 5 travels to Senegal, Bangkok, Singapore, Montreal, Mexico, Tokyo, and China, and Guangzhou, Lima. So alongside with these travels, thanks to the visibility of the award, I have been invited to talk about the research in 26 places in the last 2 years. And I taught 3 workshops. So if you add all that to the sum of my trips, I was quite scared. So it's like 170,000 miles. So it's like I did like 7 times the world tour. And yes, I'm tired. So I'm going to start with my last trip. 40 years ago in Lima, started a system of collective cooking that has been able, during these last decades, to not only reduce housekeeping costs, but also to provide access to food, as well as has been able to empower women in Peruvian society. Since its origin, these domestic organizations have been community political agencies that go beyond the act of cooking and eating. A radical system that blurs not only the limits between private and public, between family structures and domestic roles, between labor and housekeeping, but also act as a place for neighborhood management, connected directly with municipal institutions and larger political agencies. The first collective canteens were born at the end of 1970, so exactly around 1978, from grassroots movements. And it was a period in Lima of a great social mobilization and politicization that ultimately brought down the military regime. Between 1978 and 1979, the National Teachers Union, SUTEP, occupied local schools as they pressed for better wages. In solidarity with the strikers, women from the communities began to prepare collective pots, as they call it, of food to feed the strikers. For weeks, schools became places of political discussion about working conditions, housing, and communities. Many women who were leading these collective pots participated in political meetings, which encouraged them to start women's organizations focused on providing food for their families and communities in a wider sense. The first one appeared in Las Comas and El Agustino neighborhood and used to group between 20 and 40 women, with the aim to provide, as I was saying, food for the community in a daily basis. In front of the economic and social instability, these collective kitchens offer security and stability. So the typology expanded really fast, not only happened in Lima, but happened, and it's still happening in all Peru. Exactly, it expanded during the 80s, and their impact has been quite large. So suddenly they gained quite a political agency. What started around a domestic space, a kitchen, gained autonomy and entity, to the point that their social relevance and consequentially political power was radically punished during the years of the terrorist group, the Shining Path, when many attacks happened against these women and against these collective kitchens. Many of them were killed, and among them, I wanted to put her image among them the activist Maria Elena Moyano, who was murdered in 1992 by the terrorist group and provoked a huge social consternation due to that. Of course, I'm selecting Maria Elena Moyano because she was one of the leaders of the women groups, specifically la Federación Popular de las Mujeres de Villa El Salvador, FEPOMUDES, that you will see that it comes afterwards in another story. So, I'm sorry. Excuse me. What is curious is actually that despite the political imaginary that has been raised during these last decades about these collective kitchens being political, if you ask nowadays their members about their political agency, most of them, they're going to deny that. They're going to say they are quite apolitical. They consider themselves just grassroots movements that want not to be linked with any political party. However, these radical acts that I was mentioning before prove that actually they're quite totally the opposite, quite political, and just by the fact that they have a strong social impact and have a strong social influence on Peruvian society. So after several governments and different states' policies, comedores populares are still quite active in Lima, providing food to around 1 million people daily. And considering that, like around in between, depending on the cases, you can tell that between 500,000 and 1 million. But considering that the population of Lima is 8.5 million, 1 million is quite a lot. And in comedores populares, there are more than 100,000 women cooking daily for the community. So as I was mentioning, the phenomenon has not only happened in Lima, but has also happened in the whole Peru. The government registered 16,461 collective kitchens in 2017. And actually, they confess that that might be the half of it. So just the half of the reality is under control of the government. For those that don't know Lima, let me explain a bit. So Lima is a hilly city. The so-called cerros, like these little montas, characterize the urban landscape and are the areas where most of these kitchens are placed. Los cerros were, and still are, massively occupied after the 1950s due to large migrations of rural population to the city. If in 1960 the population of Lima was around 2 million, nowadays, as I was mentioning, is around 8.5 million. So the city expanded enormously during these last decades, and these populations settled in an informal manner, occupying the hills due to a lack of an infrastructure and urban planning. In one of the oldest settlements is placed one of the first collective kitchens that is still working nowadays. Situated in El Agustino, el comedor autogestionario Forjemos la Alegría is a small infrastructure run by 15 women, which are self-organized and cook once a week, serving around 100 meals daily from Monday to Saturday. The cost of the meal is around 4 soles and a half. So to picture that, is around half of the price of regular daily menu. They can offer menus for such a low price thanks to a good wholesale organization and efficient collective cooking, reducing waste and consumes. Around 50 of them, as I was mentioning, are under control of the government, and they receive monthly non-perishable foods. Most of the kitchens operate in a similar manner, and most of them, as this one, occupy pre-existing houses, so they occupy domestic infrastructures, converting any private domestic space into a collective one for the welfare of the community. This was actually an old living room before. Just few of them have been able to receive governmental help to raise up new buildings. Cases as this one, the Jesús de Nazaret, also in El Agostino, or La Balanza. La Balanza, placed in Comas, are quite an exception. As you see, La Balanza it's really well designed. It was designed by Javier Vera, Luciano Gales, and Azara Cuadros, among others. So there were architects involved. And also incorporates, apart from the kitchen, incorporates other spaces for the community as a study room, as well as a playground and a room for events. So La Balanza definitely has become a true social condenser, and it's pivotal to increase control and preserve the urban quality of its actual context. So cases La Balanza show us the relevance of the act of turning something domestic into something public. not only for the welfare of the community at large, but as I mentioned before, essential for the empowerment of women, which mostly lack until then of access to essential things as labor, education, nutrition, and social security, among other basic needs. The lady in the picture is Marta Vera. Actually, apart from running this small store, she runs a small company with 30 employees that produce bread, boiled eggs, milks, and for public schools. They prepare around 11,000 servings a week. You have to imagine that when I arrived, I was looking for a company, like a big enterprise. And then I encountered these women behind those bars. And I asked for her. And she would answer, yes, here I am. And I was definitely shocked by the fact that behind that, she was there, the owner, and behind those bars, there's a huge company that produces all this food for the public schools. So the story of Marta Vera is quite interesting. She started cooking in a collective kitchen, as many other women. She did not finish her studies, and due to her economic situation, the kitchen offered her a solution to access to food and decrease home cost. Thanks to the kitchen, she started to be involved in grassroots movements and political associations, becoming a leader of her association, and later allowing her to start her own baking business. Everything started in 1987 when U.S. Agency for International Development, so the U.S. was involved, started to ship wheat to Peru. So the U.S. wheat was distributed through NGOs to the different collective kitchens. It emerged the idea to start a system of bakeries that could produce bread for all of them. At the beginning in 1990, there were 26 bakery business, but after USAID, or USAID as they call it, stopped sending wheat, they were forced to change their economic business system, and progressively, without the aid, most of them had to close and disappear. It's quite interesting because nowadays, actually, the government of Peru is debating a regulation to encourage among these women to start their own businesses. And cases as this one show us how a shared kitchen can be also a place for economical production that go beyond the act of baking, places that can turn unwaged housekeeping labors into a wage one. Influenced by the Lima case, the government of Mexico City initiated in 2009 a social program to relieve financial pressures that were put on the middle class due to economic crisis of 2008, as you can imagine. While soup kitchens and similar had been running for years, serving free meal to people with very limited resources, much of the population affected by the economic crisis either could not use them because their economy situation was not that bad, or either they would not accept to use them. So the city thus decided to promote community kitchens run by a mixed management, half public, half private, with shared responsibilities to encourage community participation and promote citizen appropriation, all while making a significant impact with really low resources. This city-backed collective lunch program is so-called Comedores Comunitarios, is used daily by thousands of citizens in Mexico City. The system is quite simple. Any citizen with a room larger than 323 square feet in their house can apply to use this space as a community kitchen. If accepted in the program, the city will install an industrial kitchen, supply all kinds of cookware for industrial cooking, and deliver various non-perishable foods, as it happened in Peru, as rice, beans, bi-weekly or monthly. The people responsible for each kitchen, in turn, are expected to cook for the community and offer a daily menu in their homes. In the 8 years since the program began, hundreds of houses in Mexico have been refurbished to accommodate daily meals opening their living rooms to the public. and transforming private spaces into public ones. And yet, the transformation of a home into a comedor comunitario typically involves minor changes to the structure of the house itself. The communal dining room might be simply located, as here, in a patio covered in it. Or, as you will see in the future, in the next images, in even garages. I love these kind of images that show actually how the most private realm mix with the most urban and collective reality. So the residents of these homes co-live with neighbors during lunch hours. The public and the private, the domestic and the urban coexist. This one, for instance, is a comedor comunitario placed in a garage. So they take out the car a few hours and they transform it, basically. So usually in Mexico, a low-cost menu called popularly comida corrida cost about 80 pesos. And it's generally comprised by bean, rice, some wheat, tortillas, and a soup. The menu in these comedores comunitarios is similar. Yet, thanks to the government subsidy, can be sold for only 10 pesos, which is 1/8 of the regular price of a menu. And which is actually also enough to pay a minimum wage to those participating in the preparation of food maintaining and food preparation maintaining of the space. Sorry. I could have the chance to get in touch with the government, and they actually facilitate me these maps that they use to control. They actually have this system of weekly control, so the government, one social worker usually step weekly into the kitchen just to be sure that everything is okay. And when I received the map, I was deeply impressed by the fact that in such few years, less than 10 years, it started in 2009, the city of Mexico looks like this nowadays. So there are hundreds of them. And the list of demand, so the waiting list is extremely long. The government just cannot afford to pay more non-perishable foods and social workers to control. So this is a typical lunch menu in one of comedores comunitarios. So officially, food is served and must be consumed in situ. However, okay, it's Mexico. So despite the law, these kitchens usually serve food not only in-house, but also beyond, in order to increase their income and satisfy a larger demand. So there's a huge system of kind of low-tech system of deliveries that allow that to happen. Like a retired lawyer picking up food for his family and his friends. Also an employment that also helped their neighbors to pick up the food because they couldn't pick it up during labor hours. So many are family-run. Others, however, employ outside personnel. Those who work in the kitchen do so for many different reasons. Some are there to support the community, so it's more ideological, while others need the paycheck. The kitchens are mainly managed by women, who in many cases are either housewives or were previously unemployed. However, not as the Peruvian case, also a lot of men work in them. In Mexico, a wider social race participate, eat, and cook in collective kitchens. Not only the fact that male and female cook in equal way, but also the fact that they are placed in diverse neighborhoods, as you saw in the map. And that helped to turn these infrastructures to be more accessible and welcoming to anyone. We find cases as the small ones as we have seen, placed in all houses, to this one that is Las Margaritas, that occupies an old sports centers and has been able to grow. They offer like 400 meals a day, so it's quite large. And apart from the cooking services, they offer all kinds of services like doctor classes, and it's extremely well organized in order to allow that to happen with such a low budget. Classrooms for activities, small stores, psychology, tanatología, dentist. I mean, all kinds. It's really, really impressive. And they even cultivate, thanks to a New Zealand ONG, they could manage to build up this greenhouse, and they even cultivate their own products. So what does change more than anything are the dynamics of the neighborhoods themselves. The community dining room becomes an extension of the adjacent houses. The collective kitchen replaces and complements private kitchens that otherwise cease to be regularly used. Despite being a relatively quite new program, the daily routine of cooking for the community, eating, picking up things, the food, during the dining, meeting during the night at the dining room, has taken root quickly through the city. In fact, when you're actually entering one of those shared dining rooms, one feels that it's actually entering in a domestic space, despite knowing that those people don't live there. The influences of the community kitchens extends well beyond the house in which it is located. And when looking at the map that I showed you before, all these collective kitchen rooms, it is evident that the impact goes far beyond the specific neighborhood. And we're talking about a really urban network of collective participation. Let me go back to Lima. In 1990, a group of Canadian women traveled to Lima to visit comedores populares. At the time, there were already collective kitchens in the area of Quebec. And the similarity of both systems prompted the meeting. So it's not that one influenced the other, it's just that both came out at the same moment, and they met, luckily. The case of Quebec is also quite interesting. At the beginning of 1980, 3 women decided to cook collectively in order to reduce household costs at the end of the month. The initiative came from Jacine Ouellet, who's here at the picture. Actually, I picture her, and I could meet her in her actual business, the Chic Resto Pub, that operates as a restaurant for offering affordable and healthy and expensive food. So at the end, she ended up working in relation with that. So Jacine in the 80s was a single mother. She was struggling to handle not only with family expenses, but also to manage her job hours with housekeeping and family care timings. So she proposed her sister and a friend to start sharing to make the situation better, easier. And suddenly, thanks to a social worker, this domestic organization moved to a neighborhood association, opening the first neighborhood kitchen in 1986, the one that you see in the image called Hochelaga Maisonneuve. And the practice suddenly started to began to spread. There are already more than 100 collective kitchens operated. There were in the end of the 80s around 100. And what it was interesting actually is the consequences of the trip of Peru. The trip of Peru allowed them to become aware of the political power, which they were not before. And suddenly, they started to organize. They started to be organized under a partnership called Regroupement des Cuisines Collectives du Québec, that still nowadays operates as a manager of and helping them to be networked. And what is interesting is actually that despite the similarity of the Peruvian and the Canadian, or between both the Peruvian and the Canadian origin, through these last decades, these kitchens have evolved, defining large differences between them. So the origin was quite similar, but nowadays they operate radically different. In Quebec, the collective kitchen is just used every 15 days. That day, the kitchen group meets and cooks in large quantities for taking home several portions. So the act of cooking is done collectively. Everyone participates actively. The groups are small, about 8 people, and they are run by a social worker who organizes and controls the session in order to make it successful. Being so small, the participation is always really intense. I always cook in these ones when I visit. You had to. So everyone is equal. Everyone cook for eating. Although the system is exemplary, maybe for this reason, for the fact that it's so well defined, so exemplary, the social impact of these Canadian collective kitchens is proportionally much smaller than those of Mexico or Lima. Excessive preparation and standardization makes a larger participation unviable, despite actually existing a big demand to participate. Collective processes entail the risk of excessive standardization and regulation, and the consequent exclusion of those who basically don't follow the rules or don't fit into the standard. Also, the fact that cooking happens not frequently, just every 2 weeks, hardly satisfies the amount of food and cooking needed. So cooking in these kitchens covers more than a nutritional and economical everyday need. They cover actually a social need. This is probably one of the largest ones, that they combine the collective kitchen with the restaurant as well as other economical activities. So the kitchen is extremely large and industrial. So when you ask all the participants, when you ask most of the people participating in this organization, they answer that they do it to socialize, basically, to have a sense of belonging in a community, to form part of something. So if in Lima, Mexico, we draw conclusions about the capacity of collective kitchen to empower women, as well as their capacity to turn domestic cooking into paid labor, decreasing housekeeping costs and facilitating family care, Canada is illustrative of the capacity of these collective kitchens to establish social bonds. And comparing them, I learned about the consequences of regulating, of excess of regulation, of this, and of course, of the different ways of regulating. This is collective kitchens in Canada. So regarding the importance of the aforementioned regulations, I could research the urban implications related to cooking regulations visiting Bangkok and Singapore. Maybe stressing the relation of politics and architecture is a truism, but nevertheless, it remains interesting to analyze the effects of the regulations and the deregulation of everyday life in a really similar manner and even contagious way. So, the actual market of Bangkok is filled with apartments that lack of kitchens, or if they do, those are hardly used. This kitchenless society is based on an extremely rich food market that provides delicious food at low cost, from very minimal kitchens composed of a pair of wicker baskets, which sell pre-cooked dishes, to fully equipped mobile kitchens that sell complex recipes cooked in situ. Bangkok streets covered daily for a few hours in places of they are converting for a few hours of places of food production and consumption. The fact that the street itself, which is actually the street food, which is actually popularly called hawker, so the hawker food, is good and cheap, facilitates its daily consume, and allow to relieve daily housekeeping annoyances, and in some cases, avoid even to have a kitchen. The economic efficiency of this cooking infrastructure relies on various factors. Most of the hawkers just cook one dish, so they are specialized, or at least, or a few dishes, but the good ones want just one. And the fact that they just cook just one dish actually allows them to refine the recipe, as well as to optimize purchases and infrastructures, reducing radically the cost. I learned that talking to them. They're father and son. The son is taking over the business. He has turned 65. And after 40 years helping his father, he's finally taking over. His grandfather was already cooking there in the same spot, cooking the same delicious pork with rice. Even if looking at the picture, it doesn't look like a proper place to eat. Most of the ministers of Thailand eat here daily. And when they open, they have always a long line to be able to eat the delicious recipe. It's actually a well-known food court and food place to eat in Bangkok. When I asked Cam, my research assistant, why she never cooked at home, she actually took me here to understand. And I radically and suddenly really fast understood the reality. Cam was not able to cook this dish, and it would be like for me or for anyone in Thailand able to cook this dish. First, you don't have the access to that quality of pigs, basically, because just this family have access to that. And does this family to have access to a recipe that have been working for more than a century? So even if you try it at home, forget it. So considering that, me being a Spanish that I love cooking, I did understood why most of Bangkok citizens didn't cook at home. Alongside with this, the fact that they are movable allows them to avoid rents and high expenses, decreasing extremely their cost, their expenditures. In cooking and consumption terms, the whole city is organized under an illegal system. Not illegal, illegal. Despite that these kitchens are not officially regulated by the government, a set of social agreements allow them to operate daily. Being able even to be provided properly with electricity and water supply, as well as other supplies. I was also fascinated by all the infrastructure of these movable kitchens that pop up, hide in garages during a few hours, pop up again. And of course, this social agreement implies the police that in an unofficial manner regulates and helps this social welfare. Lately, the government is trying to get control of the situation by cleaning the streets of hawkers. When I traveled last year in Bangkok, I found it was actually the topic to talk. A radical step that most citizens do not support and that may affect actually the existing kitchenless market. For me, it was curious to compare this way of living to how Singapore first faced the same regulation process decades ago in a successful manner. So how to use regulation for good and for bad. After Singapore got independence in the 60s, a huge reform based on housing took place in order to face the existing crisis. At that time, many people were living in unhygienic slums and crowded squatter settlements. The Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, founded then the Housing and Development Board, the famous HDB, to promote social housing, which progressively built and defined the actual domestic landscape. If at that time just 99% of the population were living in social housing, nowadays more than the 80% of the population lives in a public house, popularly called HDB homes. The new housing developments included the regulation of hawker food in order to eliminate street cooking for hygienic reasons, and at the same time preserve the culture by regulating expenses thanks to a system of low rents. It came out then the hawker center as a new architectural typology that would allow to allocate all those movable cooking street infrastructure under one roof. Hawker centers are always strategically situated at the center of each housing development, allowing them to be close and accessible to the inhabitants of each community. And thanks to the governmental support, rents and infrastructural expenses are kept low, and consequently, food prices are also low. By including these cooking centers in public housing developments, placing this cooking infrastructure in proximity to homes and regulating adequately their management. The government has afforded and assured the access to cooked food in a daily basis and preserve the decreasing domestic cost and annoyances. Alongside the hawker center, the so-called boy deck also came out. During the first decades of the Housing and Development Board, they actually promoted a type of block which left the ground floor empty for community uses. The type of occupation that can be done in the boy deck, as you may imagine in Singapore, is well defined and regulated. However, despite that, all kinds of uses happen in a casual manner. I realized at the end of the day that I was attending a funeral that I didn't realize before because I was playing cards with them, eating. There was a kitchen, and it was really nice, actually. So when the community agrees, all those programs can be enclosed and formalized and turned permanent. I could find some shared kitchens that neighborhood built for daily use, as this one. They are quite exceptional, but despite that, they have become a reference for a new type of community kitchen that the government is promoting nowadays. This is Good Life Makan. It's a community kitchen place at Marine Terrace and designed by DP architects that open daily to allow the elderly of the community to cook collectively. By elderly, I mean, and legally means they're over 55. And Montfort Care, which is a private association, takes care of the place, and the government basically gives financial supports, providing, among other things, food for cooking. There are no fixed rules, so no rules, just that the food is free and available in the fridge, and you just need to clean when you leave. So cooking teams are self-organized, and internal packs and rules are rearranged permanently. Self-management, therefore, is encouraged, and also through the architectural design. So this case, I would say that is similar as comedores comunitarios in Mexico. The success of this Singaporean kitchen typology relies on the fact that the regulation is open and allows citizens appropriation. After 1 year of its opening, it has been proved that the public expenses to support the elderly has decreased in that area, thanks to the kitchen. So it seems that the typology will or may expand in the future years in Singapore. I could also this type of community kitchens for caring. So if we were looking before for community kitchens for women, in this case, it's and for housekeeping, labor, wages. In this case, it's quite clear that there's an idea of caring of the other embedded. And I could find this typology also in Japan. And this is a really nice story as well. A couple of years ago in Saitama, near Tokyo, a quite exemplary case called Keri Yoshikawa opened. The architect Chie Kono was commissioned to design the offices of an association dedicated to the elderly, actually. And during the design process, she proposed to install a large kitchen in the offices to do events for the elderly from time to time. The kitchen was defined as a large table, as you see, where a stove and a point of water were installed. And in front of it, a large window was open to allow visibility of the association activities. What was surprising is that during the construction process, the children of the neighborhood began to appear by the space gradually, playing in it and appropriating it. So it turned out that many of them spent many hours alone while parents were working until late, and it ended up eating really poorly. So basically, children between 3 years old and 13, 14 years old, they're alone from 5 to 11 p.m. mostly, and they have to prepare by themselves dinner, as well as doing the homework. So suddenly, being aware of this reality, a group of women decided to start cooking regularly for these children. Currently, they meet every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They cook dinner for around 30 children. And at the end, what is really interesting is that actually adults also have start joining the dining ritual. And the kitchen for children has ended up being also a neighborhood kitchen. So residents have started growing food in their balconies to nourish the kitchen, and collective participation allows to offering low-cost meals for everyone. And what I was also really surprised is that this actually is not the only case in Japan, as this one in the picture as well. So in the last years, this new type of community kitchen for the children have emerged in the country. They are called Kodomo. They are so numerous that an association called Kodomo Shokudo was founded in 2015 to group them all. And nowadays there are around 250 Kodomos, and they're expanding. And I would say that probably Japan was the richest country in my research. An important fact, and basically also regarding the fact that I could find a wide diversity of kitchen typologies and realities. That's Kodomo kitchens. But it surprisingly actually is that Tokyo housing market is filled by apartments with shared kitchens of all kinds. Several companies, as the one that we have in the image, our house, offer exclusively this new Japanese housing typology that as they consider, is becoming clearly a market trend. So as Oak House, last year I could encounter like 7 real estate companies. I didn't double check this year, but they're really expanding. So just taking a look to the impact on Tokyo, this image shows just the available rooms in the available buildings that they had in last August 2018. So imagine the ones that are occupied, and imagine that multiplied per 7. So it's really interesting to see the wide range of building types, from really large infrastructures, as these ones where the kitchen is shared by many inhabitants, hundreds, and they're called social houses, basically because they're communicated as that, as places to socialize. I could even find one that they promise you that you would be married in 2 years. Truly. It's Japan, that happens. To really small ones as these ones, where a small group of people from 4 to 7 people, usually workers, working people, shared the kitchens, and these ones, they call them share houses to distinguish the typology. And among these small-scale share houses, there are really famous ones that have been widely published online in Arts Daily because they are really well designed, as this one, the Yokohama Apartments, designed by On Design and Erika Nagakawa. Or this one designed by Satoko Shinohara and Ayano Ishimura. Or this a bit freak one called Nanja, that alongside the share house, they host a cafe on the tree, so you can go and have a nice coffee there. That's Nanja. It's really nice. to this one, that is probably the newest and more extraordinary one. It's called Shibuya Cast. It's an extremely expensive and elitist living community placed on the top floor of a newly built tower in Shibuya and designed by Naruse Inokuma. And they call themselves Co-Family. And it's actually really difficult to get in. I had the chance to be with them for a while. So the variety of types and rents prove that the economical factor is not the main cause of the success of the typology. Despite the diversity, they have all in common one thing. Their inhabitants choose to share the kitchen in order to belong to a community and socialize. It is said that this social trend started in 1995 with the first big earthquake in Kobe. Due to the natural disaster and its consequential social crisis, it emerged a feeling that the contemporary Japanese society, which a large part lives alone, considered that the data says that more than 50% in Tokyo is living alone nowadays. So this contemporary Japanese society have not been able to keep, so the feeling is that actually this contemporary social society have not been able to keep traditional neighborhood bonds, erasing certain values of the social fabric. This need for socialness boosts a new culture of sharing that has been also empowered by the medias that create an imaginary of values of sharing through films and TV serials. The first one, the first popular one, I would say, came out in 2000, and it was a film called Room Shared, but then we could also recall 2008 Last Friends serial, or probably the most known ones that you can, if you have Netflix, you can have access to it, that is Terrace House, which is actually nowadays being produced also by Netflix. If I go backwards, just take a look to the kitchens that these people have, and take a look to Terrace House, imaginary. You can tell that there's something there. So in most of these kitchens, the act of cooking is not done collectively. They might do it by, they essentially share the space. So they do it once in a while, they don't cook daily. The act of sharing this domestic space is already a strong tool that allows to raise community bonds for good or bad, accepting the values of dissent and conflict. Despite that the Japanese case is quite particular, this sharing culture tendency is also a worldwide trend. I cannot deny that. And it's being widely discussed and debated. And of course, housing is not a part of all of this. Cases as the well-known We Live in New York and similar companies prove that. I traveled to China to visit U+. U+ is probably the most significant housing company that, understanding the potentialities of this international sharing culture trend, is promoting housing with shared facilities. There have already 18 complexes in different cities in China that host around 5,000 people, and they want to expand soon internationally. The founder of the company is Lei Jun, who is the founder of the mobile company Xiaomi. This could be an anecdote. However, U+ uses clearly Silicon Valley imaginary, offering these houses to start-up entrepreneurs and promising a better business improvement through the use of their social spaces and networks. And despite the values of the project, it raises many doubts and questions regarding benefits outcome of all of this, especially by the fact that despite using welfare social vocabulary, the economic outcome is clearly capitalized for the benefit of just one company. But let me go back to Japan to finish my story. When Kobe's earthquake, a collective housing group was defined by the government to come up with new developments for those affected by this disaster. Among others, the professor and architect Ikuko Koyabe worked in Kobe area, promoting the shared spaces for the reconstruction. 10 buildings with collective kitchens were built at that time. most of them for the elderly, which were actually the most needed ones. And Manofuneai, the one that you have in the picture, was the one to be built. Despite of the success of the projects, the kitchens were abandoned, and nowadays they look like this, totally not used. The lack of adequate process of design, as well as the lack of a good regulation, pushed the decay. Basically, inhabitants never felt that those shared spaces were theirs. This is another one with shared kitchens. And despite that, Ikuko Koyabe kept researching and promoting the typology. She wrote many books about co-housing, having a special interest on co-housing in Sweden. She traveled there, registered carefully the Swedish experiences to push similar projects in Japan. Finally, in 2003, the first co-housing was built up, this one that we have in the image. And after 2 years of design process in which all the inhabitants were included to assure future appropriation and design adequation, Kankamori was built up. Kankamori occupies a existing second floor in a building that exists already, where there are 28 units of housing and with kitchens. And they have also many spaces shared as the kitchen, as well as other types. And after Kankamori, the collective house, after that, it was founded a collective houses corporation to promote this kind of co-housing in Japan. And it has been quite active in the last years, building 6 buildings of co-housing. And they are 3 or more, they have 3 more under design. So as you see, the apartments have a little kitchen, and they share a big one. In 2009, they could build their first new building, fresh from scratch. And this one. And usually these buildings are occupied by around 50 people. That's kind of the normal community size. And they just share 2-3 meals weekly. So clearly the shared cooking and knitting does not satisfy a daily need, as I was mentioning in previous Japanese cases. So it's definitely a social act. In the Japanese cases, it's clear that sharing domestic spaces allowed to define and raise communities, empowering them. This is also how the space of the kitchen operates in rural areas in Senegal. And this is going to be my last trip, and the one that I explained tonight. When I traveled to Dakar, I could encounter many apartments that share a room as a space for cooking. Usually, this tiny room is used by 2 to 4 families, that they share the space, but never the cooking devices, never the fire. This way of inhabiting, and I'm saying that because here fires are movable as well, so it would be easy to share it. This way of inhabiting comes from a rural tradition, where the house is usually defined by a set of rooms. Let me go to it. So as I was mentioning, this way of inhabiting comes from a rural tradition, where the house is usually defined by a set of rooms that enclose a patio. This typology, called maison impluvium, came out to organize and protect the members of a clan. In those dwellings, usually more than one family lives, occupying several rooms. The number of rooms of room occupation per family varies depending on the needs of the family and depending on the timing. And they all share. So basically, this is, I think that it's really important to reinforce, because I find it's impressive and interesting, the fact that they can actually expand and decrease their living spaces. And they always share the center as actually a cooking place, where fires define different cooking spots. Here are drawn. And it looks like this. So you can see that here it's happening 2 cooking at the same time, and she was actually cooking as well. So 3 cooking at the same time. So in this typology, the collective kitchen becomes the center of a set of dwellings that are in relationship without necessarily immediate physical contact. But by sharing one of their pieces, they are related. I brought a lot of these images because probably this is the case that impacted me the most, and actually it was the first trip that I did at the beginning of these 2 years. So if we abstract this idea and remove the food from the equation, so forget about the cooking and the kitchen, we would have a city composed of housing and collective rooms, strategically located as satellite spaces where any household could happen. A fragmentary domestic city, a city composed of diffuse homes, whose limits vary depending on the use of those inhabitants. The Senegalese typology dates centuries back and embodies a whole architectural tradition of a vast African area, made with humble technology in non-urban context, and it's maybe one of the cases from this trip that could be seen from far away from some of those problems concerning developed capitalism and technological societies. Nevertheless, this particular case renders visible how architecture and society are bound and interact. Overall, above all, makes us questions from tradition about the past and about its immediate future. All these kitchen stories that I explained tonight, even if they're very diverse, share some things in common. All of them are attempts to reshape the relations between public and private. All of them are attempts to redefine our notions of urban and domestic sphere. And in a more and more connected society through this invisible technological landscape, these architectural typologies appear as physical tools, as a possible physical correlate through those unphysical bonds. All of those examples that I showed tonight could be seen not only as places of production or empowerment of women or of communities, but maybe also as possible precursors of new typologies able to transgress and redefine pre-established social and spatial domestic conditions. Thank you.
Please change a little, and then I'll turn it to the. So thank you so much, Anna. I want to quickly turn the question and answer to the audience, but just to develop maybe a little bit where you were beginning to go at the end, which I would say is the big question about how do you start to move the analysis part of this project toward design, toward proposition, and you begin to find patterns in common. Looking maybe even for, I don't know if typologies any longer is the right word, but somehow patterns of form and occupation that cross the very diverse cultures. And one of the things, so I have a two-part question. The first is more, let's say, culture and form or something. The street food, the Asian street food seems to me in a way the one that is so familiar and also maybe unchangeable. I mean, unchangeable unless it turns into something else entirely, or difficult to develop because it's so successful, but it depends on very particular cultural and agricultural situation, access to raw material, tradition of that kind of eating, and it's very successful. It seemed quite different to me than the Peruvian example or the Japanese, which are also very different. But there were still cultural peculiarities, but you could start to see formal patterns in the architecture develop, which might be continued and refined. However, what I'm wondering is, are the cultural situations so particular that they limit very much design possibilities? It seemed to me that in the wealthier cases, let's say, you could find analogs to the Japanese case, I think, in New York and even Boston. You could certainly find them in Seattle, where, 20-year-old, 30-year-old men, in a lot of the cases, like in Seattle, live alone in very small places and need collective kitchens for social and nutritional reasons. But then it's not about empowering women, it's about empowering 30-year-old tech guys, right? And it seems very, very particular, those situations, whereas in the Japanese case, I think it's also, they were very young, and I do think there's a whole generation who marry later, if at all, who often live alone and need that social and nutritional combination. So I don't quite know the question, but it has something to do with, are the sort of ethnographic limits so severe that a design proposition is actually inhibited by the particular cultural situation, or are you beginning to see certain commonalities, certain typologies that might lead to a more propositional phase of the project as opposed to the analytic phase?
No, on purpose I wanted to finish with the floor plan. I have hardly shown floor plans, mostly were images. And I did that because one of my struggles was all the time to try to come out with kind of a more architectural design perspective, and at the same time I was struggling all the time by the fact that I was putting on the same table such a diverse reality that in certain moments they were not comparable at all. And after these 2 years of intensity, I do realize also after doing a PhD that it's such a different way of looking at things. When you jump from one country to another, you eat all the time, and you just swallow references. At the end, what you swallow is actually an individual decision. So at the end, it's the way I look at things, and therefore the way I do understand contemporary, our contemporary condition. And definitely, my story is an Occidental story that comes from a certain culture. And definitely the way that I have explained these things today definitely has or wills to have a consequence on our close proximity. And if you ask me more specifically, definitely that's why I thought that the Senegalese case, not only because the typology is so clear, but also the fact that it was the most ambiguous one. It was really difficult to discuss for me, going there and asking and researching, asking their inhabitants how actually they inhabit.
Which one? The Senegal?
Most, all the houses that I shown are placed in the south of Senegal, in the area of Casamance. Most of them are little towns. Some of them are not that little, like 15,000 people. And but still, it was really difficult to disguise, for instance, what family meant for them, which kind of uses they were doing. Even if you're doing exactly the same thing as I was doing, sleeping, eating, we are all the same. But the way they understood the house, it was so different that for me, I thought that somehow it was the closest one to what I think that it should be the future of our homes.
So the corollary part, which also has to do with moving it forward, I think it's maybe a little unfair because it's not part of your story. But one of the things that obsesses our students a little bit are technologies, robotic technologies, new kinds of transportation, including robotic or autonomous vehicles. You mentioned a little bit delivery in one of the cases, I think the Peruvian case. But is it your sense that mostly you emphasized in situ, that the cooking and the eating both, and this is why it works as a community, as something more than just food, but a place for childcare and and maybe even elderly gathering, it works because it's in situ in a collective space. But can you imagine future delivery systems, maybe when they become economical, that where a collective production of food could be delivered, rather than eaten in situ, could be delivered and have positive impact? Did that ever, maybe in the Japanese case or in the more wealthy cases, did things like that ever come up? Or that was, yeah.
Actually, that was quite a discussion in the 19th century here in New York.
Is that right?
Yeah.
For the hotels.
Yeah, for the hotels. So a lot of, and also it was a time when the pneumatic tube came out. So as well as the electric cart. So all the newspapers were talking about how to use that in order to transport deliveries, and especially also cook and raw food. So yeah, they tried even to ship soups to see, you know, if the tubes were sealed enough and that the soups were arriving properly heated. So that happened.
Yeah. Questions, comments for Anna? Yeah, Andrew.
So I'm sort of intrigued by this last.
Hi.
Good to see you. Great, a microphone. So I'm interested in following up on Michael's line of thinking in a admittedly somewhat perverse way, so forgive me, but all of your examples are sort of beautifully bottom up and sort of like community driven, and there is this incredibly organic conviviality. Like very close to that, if we pursue Michael's line of thinking, is actually the idea of sort of mealtime conviviality as a service that could potentially be penetrated by sort of capitalist inclinations. And so I'm wondering if you ever saw, in addition to these sort of like bottom-up community spaces, it's kind of corporate other. Like, is this also coming soon?
The Chinese case that I brought, I brought it for that. So my goal was also to prove, like, to show that I'm aware of that reality, and it's a double-sided coin. It's really complicated to figure out because it is a discussion that it's on the table and it's really hot and there's too many things and it's really difficult to understand. But it's clear that the use of language, they appropriate certain vocabulary from certain policies in order to operate in a different manner. I was shocked by the fact that, for instance, all the workers of the company live there. So they work 24 hours, 24/7. And that shocked me. But what actually really shocked me is that they were really proud. Of course, the owners of the company, I met the CEOs, and they don't live there. So then, yeah, there's a lot of risk. And it's better to say it in between lines.
One more.
I wondered if you had considered in this review the kibbutz collective of the 50s and 60s in Israel and its evolution to today as a model for some of the things that you've shown here.
Yeah, I have left out of the scope a lot of cases that I guess I will continue. I mean, it's been too much. I promise. I have to do this. It has been the most difficult lecture I've done in my life. I wasn't really nervous, as you might have seen, basically because it has been really hard, not only to try to sum up all what I have seen, but also being aware that there's a lot that I haven't included. Of course, I didn't include all the, for instance, also the European cases. Like in Sweden, thanks to also the visibility of the award, that also was actually really helpful. I rechanged all my initial proposal because I started receiving a lot of emails of people that actually live in under those typologies, and they were inviting me to go. And And I avoid the European cases because they're much more studied. And I focus more on those cases that are not that well known. I would say that, yeah, Bangkok and Singapore are the exception, but I just was curious about the consequences of street food, basically. And because I tried at that moment to establish a connection between recipes and shared kitchens. So to understand which cultures actually have a culinary culture that can just happen if you share the kitchen. And that, for instance, in Senegal and the southeast of Asia. But I didn't talk about it because it was, too few time. And I'm aware of the kibbutz. It might be a field of research for the close future.
Well, last question here.
Hi. I was just wondering that after coming back from all of this research to your practice as an architect, particularly in a Western context with certain, I mean, I don't know if it's in Spain as entrenched as it is here, but entrenched ideas about private property and entrenched ideas about how housing is to be built. Have you had any success strategically as a practitioner trying to implement some of these more collective ideas? And as speaking to an audience of people who are either practitioners of architecture or endeavoring to be so, do you have any advice in terms of how to maybe even sell it?
I really appreciate that question, because I'm going to come back to the floor plan that I think I was not clear enough before. My fascination for this floor plan has many reasons, and mainly, as I was trying to introduce before, is because the idea that generic is there. So it was really difficult for me to understand how people live, because actually the space was not clear, and also their culture was not clear for me. So the combination of both, it was really confusing. So I understood the power, how a space can be generic in the sense that due to its form and speciality and even materiality, you cannot even distinguish its program. And I thought that that was really powerful in housing. And it's something that I actually traveled to Senegal because a former student emailed me, Anna, where you're talking is here. So I went. And she was totally right. So this idea of the generic space was already there on the table as an interest in the office, and we're still pushing it. For instance, now and pushing it further. So it's not only about building spaces that are generic in program, going beyond the idea of equal rooms, we know that, but pushing that further, but also how to raise collective spaces that might not look like collective and produce collectivity. So, for instance, in Mexico, we're building now a social housing block, thanks to, alongside with other architects that HHF is teaching here this semester. So HHF is also building with us, and Pierre Vilmom, Dogma, and thanks to Tatiana Bilbao, well, big group, we're designing a lot of housing there. And our block is placed in a neighborhood that deals with drugs. It's a quite violent neighborhood. Even if they don't consider it, I do consider it, to the point that you cannot have a car in the street. So, and we do that, they're going to fence our open spaces, but we're designing them in order to force that to happen, to force a discussion and dialogue between neighbors. So there are huge terraces in front of generic rooms. And those terraces are generic in the sense that exactly it's difficult to tell if they're collective or private, if they're individual or for one family or for two families. So we hope that that's going to force them actually an active dialogue, and we'll see the consequences. We're really lucky because the government is allowing us to kind of try. That sometimes it's really difficult to do that.
I'm just impressed of how the original proposal really focused on kitchens, and housing, of course, has to be there, but it was a kind of corollary. It was really about kitchens. And now it's amazing to me the way even the stress on where the raw material food comes from, how close is it or how is it delivered to the place, how community space, how ages of, from the children to the elderly, how the community space deals with all these. That the kibbutz example is a good one insofar as there has to be a kind of totalizing analysis of all these factors. When it really started with, let's say, just the kitchen, it ends up with an entire city sector, if not a city itself. And I think that was that systematicity that you uncovered was really, really helpful. So thank you, Anna. Thanks for coming back.